One of the most common questions that I get from part-time real estate agents is, Brandon, when should I quit my job? When's the right time? When do you think I should quit my job? Of all the times I've been asked this question, I've really thought about this quite a bit. And there's 3 different scenarios under which I would advise somebody to consider quitting their full-time job to become a full-time real estate salesperson. The first one is this thing that I call self-employed mirage. Now, let's go deep on this. What do I mean by this? So right now, if you have a full-time job, the employer is paying you X amount for X result or X actions. If the results they're paying you for ever stop, then your job is in jeopardy. Most of you can conceptualize that and say, yeah, so what? Well, here's what we see in real estate. So if you're working, call it 40, 45 hours, 50 hours a week, and we'll call it, as an example, in exchange for $50,000 a year of income, what we see all too often is somebody leave that full-time job, get into real estate. Now, remember what I said, that employer is expecting you to do certain things in exchange for the money. In real estate sales, that exchange of money is prospecting. And so when we see people leave the job where they're working 40, 45, 50 hours a week, it's very, 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 very rare, if ever, that we see that person spend the same amount of time at their employer than they do for themselves and expecting to earn not the same money, but more money. Did you catch that? So Bob, who's got a full-time job, he works 45 hours a week in exchange for $50K a year. That employer expects Bob to do certain things in order to keep that paycheck coming in every Friday or every other Friday. Well, Bob, that whole time, is a part-time realtor. He says, I want to become full-time self-employed. I don't want to work for anybody. I like the idea of working for myself. I want to be my own boss. I want to come and go as I please. I want to do what I want, when I want, with whom I want. He leaves that full-time employer, gets into real estate. Well, the expectation would be that, well, Bob, don't you think that it's reasonable that you should at least work the exact same amount of time that you were working at your full-time job for yourself if you want to make more money? Bob says, well, of course. He becomes a realtor, and what do we see? Not only does Bob not work 40, 45, 50 hours a week, it's hard to get Bob to show up ever to do his job of prospecting and generating business. And at the very same time, Bob is confused. Why am I not succeeding in this business of real estate? That's the mirage I'm talking about. For some reason, we miss it. We say, wait a minute, I showed up early, I stayed late, I never missed a day, I never called in sick when I worked for somebody else. And then when I go to work for myself, I rarely show up 3, 4, 5 hours a day to prospect, to generate the amount of leads and prospects that I need to achieve the closing goal that I have to earn the income that I say that I want. And somehow we're confused. So before you quit your job, we have to accept the fact that not only do we need to invest the same amount of time, but it's likely more time, more effort if we expect to replace that income that we were making at the full-time job, let alone if we sit here and say we want to make more money. You can't work less being self-employed in the first couple of years, not show up for yourself the way you showed up for your employer, and expect to make more money. That would be the definition of cognitive dissonance. Wanting high results and putting low effort. Those two things are not in alignment. So that's what I call the self-employed mirage. So until we have those things set, I would not quit your full-time job. Number 2 on my list, I wouldn't quit your job until you have at least 6 months of income saved. So what I mean by income, I'm not talking about having 6 months worth of bills covered, because if your bills are covered, you still need money to live. I'm talking about whatever you're making right now. Let's use that same example of Bob making $50K. If you're making $50K a year and that is what you're used to living on, I would not quit your full-time job unless you have at least $25,000 in cash sitting in a checking account somewhere. This way, when you get into real estate full-time, you don't have to be a nervous wreck all the time like many are that come out of a full-time job. They're so used to living this lifestyle where they get their paycheck every Friday or every other Friday to going to a world where you might not get paid for the next 90 days or 120 days. So we want to make sure that from a mindset perspective, you're in a place where you can focus on the work at hand while at the same time detaching from the outcome. Well, someone can only detach from the outcome if they're sitting on enough capital where they don't have to stress out about how they're going to pay their rent on Friday. Now, when we're looking at, okay, let's make sure that we have 6 months worth of savings and we're detaching from the outcome, the other thing that this allows us to do is to not not come across desperate, not come across needy. Because what happens is this: people leave their full-time job, they get into real estate, they have no savings, and therefore they're so desperate for money, they come across as such, and as a result, they repel prospects because prospects don't want to work with needy, desperate salespeople the same way those people turn you off. And so in order to not come across desperate, not come across with commission breath every single time you talk to another human being, you have to be in a financial position that makes you feel secure. Number 3 on the list: if I'm going to quit the full-time job, you may consider wanting to join a team before you become a solo agent. So here's what I would have you consider. Of course, it's up to you, but my thoughts are this: a team in real estate is the closest thing that we have to recreate a world where someone has a full-time job as a W-2 employee. So what a good potential first step could be is, and this is no disrespect, this is just the truth. We're talking about humans here, right? So the reality is this: you all know the stats, all right? So you all know 9 out of 10, 90% of people that get into this real estate business they're out within 2 years, all right? So putting that aside, the reason for all of that happening is because of what I mentioned earlier on in this video. We come out of a world with tons of structure, tons of visibility, tons of accountability in order to get that paycheck on Friday. Most of us, when you rip that person out of that environment and now they're responsible for themselves, where they have all the freedom to do whatever they want, humans are naturally going to take the path of least resistance. So for most, not everyone, but for most, that is a bad situation to be in, because for most, they will take the path of least resistance. They won't show up for themselves the same way they showed up for others. They won't put forth the amount of work or effort that they did, unfortunately, like they were when they worked for somebody else, because they were attached to that paycheck. They didn't want to lose it. And so therefore, a good viable option is, well, I want to succeed in this business of real estate. I'm thinking long term. So why not join a team maybe for my first year or two, where I'm in a world that has accountability, that has visibility, that requires me to be in an environment with other people every single day, and I treat it like a job, which it is for the first year or two. Let me establish some credibility. Let me establish that I can actually succeed in this business before I go off on my own. And that might be a good, viable next step for you to quit your full-time job, get into a team where maybe you have some more certainty, where maybe they're even paying you a base salary, maybe they're giving you all of your leads, they're doing all of your marketing, they're handling all of your customer service, they're handling all of your transaction coordination. Maybe that's a good, viable first step into becoming a full-time solo real estate agent. So that's one of 3, right? Any of these would be sufficient, but before you quit that full-time job, number 1, you understand the self-employed mirage, that I have to show up for myself the same way I'm showing up for my employer to give myself the equal opportunity to replace or earn more than I was working full-time. Number 2, I am not going to quit my full-time job until I at least have 6 months worth of income saved, so I can have my mind focused 100% at the job at hand. And then number 3, maybe before I go off and go on my own, I join a team for my first year or 2. So let me know what questions you guys have, and certainly I'd be honored to support you in that transitioning phase from going full-time employed to full-time self-employed. And if you want my help, I will put a link beneath this video for us to have a conversation about potentially getting into a coaching relationship. You can learn all the details of the Listing Agent Academy and then decide if it's for you or not. So if not, then I will look forward to seeing you in another video very soon.